Thanks everyone for coming. This is really amazing turnout. And also thank you to Carol and Ihor for putting on this show. It happened fairly quickly, and I'm really happy to be showing the work here at McMaster. So as Carol mentioned, I was a graduate student here about 10 years ago in the kinesiology department. And I'd always had an interest in photography, but never really had considered it as a career. And but it was while I was here at McMaster, I would often come to the art gallery to unwind and just to find a quiet space when things were really stressful with school. And so while I was here, I came across a little small show of Edward Burtynsky's work. And I knew Ed's work, but I'd never really seen a show. And I remember this being a really powerful moment for me when I kind of went, wow, this is a really amazing art, and could this be something that I could pursue? So, but I kept on with my studies because I really enjoyed grad school. And, but I quickly started getting more serious about photography. So I joined the photo club here at McMaster, and they had a dark room down in the basement of one of the buildings, and started out with a 35mm camera, and quickly moved up to a 4x5 camera, so sort of a more serious field camera. And this is a photograph I took when I was a student here, so I had sort of forgotten about this photo, and when I was preparing for this talk, I was looking through older work and found this shot, and it's quite reminiscent of that later photograph from almost the same spot that I took several years later. So I'd already sort of started working at the idea. So I finished my master's, and there's a photograph of me with my parents, and wasn't quite sure. I'd spent about 4 years or 3 years at that point trying to get into med school. Really enjoyed my master's degree, met some great people here, and made a lot of good friends. So I decided to, at that point, to continue my PhD. So I did 1 year of PhD. I got into med school. I finally achieved this goal that I've been trying for several years. And it was sort of a funny feeling. There was a real great feeling of, wow, I finally got in. And then the reality of what that meant sort of hit me. So I spent a lot of time that summer thinking about what life would be like as a doctor, and whether or not I wanted to pursue life as an artist. So what ultimately changed my decision made my decision for me was the Highway 69 construction. I don't know if people are familiar with that highway, but it runs from Barrie up north to Sudbury, basically. And I'd been accepted into med school in Sudbury. So the moment when I finally made my decision, because I struggled back and forth that whole summer, was driving my stuff up to move into my apartment in Sudbury to start medical school. So I had all my stuff in a U-Haul and driving by the highway, and I just said, I feel too strongly that I need to pursue this as a project and do it properly. If I'm at med school, there's no way I'll be able to do it properly. So that was sort of the decision moment for me, was to pursue the work that way. So at that point, I've got a few highway images here. But at that point, I'd been living in Hamilton. I met my now partner, Sarah, and she decided that she wanted to go away to finish up her school, to go to Norway to finish her undergrad, and then to do teacher's college in Australia. So at that point, I left Hamilton and moved back in with my parents, because it was a good way of starting out and not having a lot of costs as an artist starting out. And sort of tried to find my way as an artist. I remember sitting at the table with my dad one morning, and he kind of asked me, what's wrong? And I was just sort of looking off into space. I said, what do I do? Like, I'd made this decision to be an artist, but I don't really know what to do. And he sort of said, well, just go and do it. Just get out there and start to find subject matter. So that's, I really started going out to the highway a lot that year, and had a little dark room where I was processing my own negatives. And I also followed some demolitions. So the big one of the Lakeview coal burning station in Mississauga was so this is where this photograph is from. And this one's from the Don Valley Brickworks in Toronto. So when Sarah got back, we sort of sat down and said, where does it make sense for us to live? And we decided that Hamilton was the place for us. So we moved back here, and it took me a while. I was excited about getting out, about starting Hamilton again and photographing more, but it took me a good year and a half of frustration and work to try and start to get some good photographs that I was happy with. And this photograph of the bandshell at Gage Park was sort of the first photograph where I really went, wow, I think I'm getting somewhere with this. This was a bit of a different project in the way that it started. Often, it was less that I knew what I wanted to photograph, but that I knew that what I didn't want to photograph. So I felt that the steel factories had been, there'd been many projects done on the steel factories, and Ed Bertinsky had done that great work in the recycling yards, and I just felt, there's no story to be told here. After living here for, 3 or 4 years on and off, I really thought that there was something else to Hamilton, an interesting story that could be told in the streets and about the landscape. So I'd always felt really disoriented in Hamilton. Being from a small community, the place I grew up was a population of 300. We were out in the country roads. It was always easy to figure out north, south, east, and west. But I found Hamilton really disorienting. So part of this project came about as a way of just figuring out the city. So both physically, what direction is which, where do things sit in the city, but also just what is city life? What does it mean to live in a city like Hamilton? So a friend of mine had told me about the Devil's Punch Bowl, and I'm really glad I followed up on his suggestion to go up there, because what a beautiful place, what a great view of Hamilton, and the cross was really fitting, as that someone took the time and energy to put that up themselves and to light it themselves. So that was a real sort of important image in starting the work as well. So as I said, when you come into Hamilton on the QEW, I find you're really confronted with the steel factories. There's sort of almost assaulting to the senses coming over that bridge and seeing the steel factories. And you get a really different experience of the city when you come in from the other end on the 403. And I started to notice the landscape a lot more, this beautiful setting that we had here in Hamilton with the harbor, Niagara Escarpment, so on and so forth. And this photograph came about because I'd been traveling into Toronto a couple days a week, working in the city. And on this particular day, there was an accident on the highway. So the bus detoured and took the York Street Bridge. It was 8 o'clock in the morning, so it was fall. And the sun was just coming up, and I was really taken by it. Looking out the window, just went, wow, this is a beautiful scene. I was so excited I almost got up and asked the bus driver to pull over, because I was, but by the time I thought about it, he was already on the highway, so it was too late. But luckily, a few days later, the same light came, and I was out there to catch it this time. So again, this photograph sort of talks to that, what I was getting at with Hamilton being in this beautiful natural setting. And when you come in on the 403, boy, to me, if you can pay attention to the landscape, what a beautiful setting we have at that end of the city. And I love the way the highway sort of snaked through the landscape. So this is Canada Street. We live just around the corner from here, and I'd walk by this place on a daily basis. And I'd noticed that old car sitting there. It didn't really move. And I kept thinking to myself, boy, what a neat car. Someone sort of kept this on the road for a long time. It's barely running, but it's still going. And I just felt that there was a great photograph there. And it took me about 3 or 4 tries. So I tried a few times, it didn't work. And then I kept coming back, and finally, on this day, I got some really beautiful light, broken light with the clouds, and the way the cars were parked really worked for the composition. And this again this is actually also on Canada Street, so just up the street from there, a place that I would pass often, and kept saying to myself, yeah, there's a great photograph there, and finally took it upon myself one day to just set up my camera on the road and hope nobody got mad at me for blocking traffic. And this is another photograph. When you're heading out of Hamilton on the 403 towards Toronto, you'll pass this. It's called the Long Pond, and again, another place that I noticed while I was on the GO bus. So I really find you notice a lot more when you're not driving, and that's sort of how I worked a lot in Hamilton. Was I would see something that I thought was interesting, and then when the light was right and I got the right day, I would head back and try and work out a photograph. And I also love these buildings that people paint in Hamilton. They seem to use really wild colors. Excuse me. So there's this peachy color that they've painted this old brick building. And I really like the way it worked with the blank white of the trailer, which luckily that day was white. Normally it's full of graffiti, but they paint it every once in a while. So I was lucky enough to get that. It worked nicely with the photograph. Again, another brilliantly, beautifully colored building that they maintain quite well with that paint. Here, another example. This photograph was an interesting experience for me. I was across the street, and I was out there for about 45 minutes. I'd taken a few photographs already, and then a woman came out of the building, started yelling at me, saying, no, you can't take a picture here, you can't take a picture. I said, what do you mean? I'm on public property, I'm allowed to take photographs on the street. And she said, no, you can't. That image is an artist's work, it's copyrighted. And I said, what image? She said, well, we had an artist make this sign for us. And I said, wow, okay, well, I'll pack up and leave. And ironically, the sign faded in about 2 years. It only lasted a short while, so now they've got this archival record of it. So again, I tended to gravitate towards areas with 1 or 2 strong colors, and then the rest of the scene being quite subdued in color, almost black and white. Again, another example of that, sort of 3 or 4 strong colors here. And when I showed this work in Toronto, and a curator, Dennis Reed, came up to me and he said, you don't see a scene like this very often. There's 4 different periods of architecture in this one street. And I can't name them all personally, but I took his word for it. So that's something pretty unique to Hamilton, that you've got all these periods of architecture in a pretty small area. And this was sort of just traveling around the city, trying to find interesting photos. Tried to get out in the winter a lot. I just found that there weren't a lot of contemporaries working in the winter. And I just thought that this was an interesting time to try and get good photographs. So this is down, I'm forgetting exactly where, but when I was taking this photograph, so these are sort of smash-up derby cars that these people have parked in their backyard. And I was there on a few occasions, and on one occasion someone saw me and started coming over, and I thought, uh-oh, I'm not sure how this is going to go. And it is something that I worried about, photographing in the streets, was, if I'm photographing someone's house or whatnot, how they might react. And so they came over pretty aggressively and said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm an artist. And I couldn't believe how quickly that disarmed him. He said, all of a sudden he was very curious. He said, oh, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm an artist. I'm taking photographs of Hamilton, and I just really like this scene back here with the cars and the tracks going by. And so that happened on several occasions. People would come up fairly aggressively, just wondering what I'm doing, and as soon as I told them I was an artist, their tone completely changed, and they were curious about what I was doing. So that was a neat experience. And again, this composition, just pretty basic coloration, but again, the strong red of the two buildings, and was really interested in that tree as well. Big, beautiful trees here in Hamilton. So after Sarah and I had been here for about 4 or 5 years, we moved up the mountain. And as funny as it may seem, I always found the mountain to be a bit of a barrier. So when you live down the mountain, you don't always travel up the mountain. When you live up the mountain, you avoid going down the mountain as much as possible. So when we moved up the mountain, it gave me an opportunity to explore some of the views from up the mountain. So I was pretty fascinated by finding areas that gave you a pretty clear view. They're clearing more of the trees away these days, but back then it was a bit harder. So this was one of the first ones, after the Devil's Punch Bowl anyway, this was one of the first ones that I got, and sort of started working my way along the escarpment at different times a year, just seeing how basically the background stayed the same in the photographs. You have the harbor and the factories back there, and I was really interested in how the foreground and the middle ground could change the photograph so much, and working at different seasons, and also with the different clouds. Photograph of Augusta Street. This was an interesting photograph. Most of my photographs don't have people in them. Part of that reason is I work with a large format camera, so the exposures are very slow. And so often if there are people there, they're just a blur. And I also tend to gravitate to areas where there wasn't too much going on, quiet areas where I could just sort of work peacefully and look for interesting compositions. So when I arrived here on this street, I was interested in the boats and the camper van that were sitting there. And I started setting up my camera, and then the family came out, started playing in the yard. And so I walked over to the mom and said, I'm an artist, I'm taking photographs of the city, is it okay if I photograph your house? And she said, yeah, sure. So I took a few photographs that day, some without the children in them, and this one really spoke to me, that the young girl was engaging with the camera, and felt that she, in a way represents the future for Hamilton. And my own daughter, Clara, had been born a few years prior, so I think there was an attachment to her being in my life as well. This is another photograph of a home down in the East End. So this photograph, which is right behind me as well, is I think I love these old cars that people seem to keep on the road in Hamilton. But basically, a lot of what I was doing was just working with composition and colors. When I would find something I liked, I would really work the scene to try and get something that worked well compositionally. And then, as I said, I'd often go back to the same areas more than once. So I was really fascinated by this view of the harbor. So this is basically sitting in the same spot as I was in that earlier photograph that I showed you. And but I was interested in how the photograph can change just based on the different seasons. And I was sort of really happy with this photograph, even though it was quite painful to take. It was winter of 2014 when it was freezing. It was about minus 25 and minus 40 with the wind chill or something that day. So it was a bit painful getting the photograph, because it takes me half an hour at least to get set up and take the photographs. So it was well worth the experience, but it was very cold. And same thing, so that whole winter of 2014, I've been trying to get more winter photographs, because I took a few at the beginning of the project, and then we had a bunch of hot winters, and there just wasn't many opportunities to get photographs during the winter with snow. So this whole winter of 2014, I got out a lot and photographed the winter scenes. So here's that photograph, quite similar to that early black and white photograph I had taken when I was still a student, before I'd even decided to be an artist. But this is a place close to our home where we go a lot, especially when Clara was young. We would walk to the park, and I'd always loved the view from up there. So I had to work out exactly where I could stand so that there was no trees in the way, but this is the resulting photograph. And again, this is East 11th Street up on the mountain, and I'd really been looking to photograph this street for a few years even. And then finally this day came along where there was the fresh snow and the muted colors of the houses. I felt this was the right chance to photograph this place. So a bit more about my background. My father is John Hartman, who's a well-known artist, painter, and so when I made my decision to become an artist, I'd already spent 7 years in school, so I wasn't really interested in going back to do an undergraduate degree in art. Another 4 years seemed just not to make sense to me. So instead of doing that, I had the idea of doing an apprenticeship with somebody, and the first person that came to mind was Edward Burtynsky, because I loved his work and just felt that that would be a great place to start. So my dad helped contact him, and he was lucky enough for me that he said yes. I basically offered to work for free for him, just to be in his studio 1 day a week and learn from what I could from being there. Ed was very generous, and over the years took me on trips with him. I worked up to being his assistant, and also manage his digital photographs and research for him. So a bit about my process. This talk was geared slightly to photo enthusiasts. So I still shoot with an old film camera. So a 4x5 inch Linhof camera, which is basically a 100-year-old technology that has been tweaked over the years and really gives great results still if you know how to use it. So it's a very slow process. As I mentioned, it takes anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 hours for me to take a photograph. You have to use a tripod unless you're really brave, and don't mind a bit of blur in your photographs. I still shoot on film, so I carry a lot of film holders with me, and it's a lot of gear to carry around. And so that gets processed, and then I take it to digital. So I get it's called an Imicon scan done. So it's a very high resolution scan. And then I can work on the images in Photoshop. And then from there, I get Chromera prints made. So these prints that you see on the wall, if you can picture an inkjet printer, so the head travels across the paper and shoots little blobs of ink onto the paper. So a Chromera printer takes traditional photographic paper, which is sensitive to light, and instead of shooting ink onto the paper, it shoots light onto the paper and exposes it that way. And then it continues through the traditional process of going through the chemistry and developing out that way. So this is a typical Photoshop image of me working in Photoshop. So you can see here, I use a lot of layers. Basically, curves layers, what they let you do is change the color and do burning and dodging. So traditional types of techniques, but it allows you to get very precise with things and where you do them. So Georgian Bay is a project that I've been working on for several years now. And I'm lucky enough that Carnegie Gallery is doing an exhibition of those photos, as Carol mentioned. So that'll be from July through August 20th. And this project started out at a similar time that Hamilton did. So this is a photograph I took when I was a student as well. And it was sort of one of the first photographs that I took that I felt was quite successful. And it sort of led to, well, actually it didn't lead to much. For several years I was very frustrated with Georgian Bay. I kept working, taking photographs up there and not getting very good results. And then I can't remember exactly what year this was. It might have been 2009 or 2010. I was approached by Janet Lougheed, who was working for the Georgian Bay Land Trust at that point, about doing sort of a commission for them. I'd go out and take a photograph for them. They would auction it off to try and raise money for the land trust. So I spent that summer taking many photographs, trying to figure out how to photograph Georgian Bay. It was kind of, I remember laughing at myself because I'm like, well, you're in one of the most beautiful places on earth. How can you not take a good photograph here? But I found I had to actually get away from the beauty in order to make a more interesting photograph. So this image is of a channel marker. So there's some evidence of human intervention on the land with the channel marker, and it's also something personal to us. It's a channel that we use quite often going out to my parents' cottage, and sort of led to some later work. So this series came about as a way of exploring Georgian Bay's commercial past. So in the 1900s, early 1900s, the commercial fishery was very strong. There was lots of lumber activity on the bay, and also lots of tourism. And those industries have basically died off. There's a few people still doing, I guess there's not really any lumber anymore, a few people still fishing, and there is still some tourism. So I decided to go out and explore what was still there, but not just the remains of what was there, trying to find places where those commercial activities were still happening, and why these people, even though it basically didn't give them much of a livelihood, that they still wanted to be on the bay. So this image of this car was, the story behind it is that, so this is a fish camp, and for some reason one winter when there was ice, they decided to drive this Chevy out onto the rocks. It's an island, there's no road there, basically. So they got it out there, and it's been parked ever since. And it's close, something that we always talked about and joked about. So I went back here when I started this project to capture a photograph of it. And then this is another fish camp up near us, and or up near my parents and family place. And again, it's sort of reminiscent of the Hamilton work, where I was interested in this place because it was painted such a strong color, and sort of surrounded by fairly muted tones. And then this one's a bit harder to see, but there's an old log right there from the lumbering days, and also a channel marker up here that's used to mark an inside channel, sort of safe passage for fishermen and boaters up there. And this is another channel marker. I was a bit fascinated by the channel markers, partly because I'd worked for the Coast Guard for 4 years when I was a student. So I had an attachment to, these places show you the safe water where you can go. So this one was actually one that was decommissioned because the water levels in Georgian Bay fluctuate so much. The water levels got so low that they had to remove this channel. So they've removed the actual shore range part of it and just left this post. And I was sort of fascinated by how it sat in the landscape, this sort of lonely post. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much for coming in. Yeah,